location 215 at Leland Ave. We'll go to the phone line here, and we find the Congresswoman, Elise Stefanik, joining us here on the program. And hopefully these are conversations we'll continue to have here because you're a representative of ours, at least part of our listening area, if things go the way that they've been laid out as far as redistricting and the lines and the maps. So, Elise, officially, good morning, and thank you for joining us here this morning.
Good morning. Great to be with you. I'm looking forward to future conversations.
Yeah, there's good. There's a lot that we can talk about and we can discuss, but let's jump right into it here. And I know you have some thoughts, some criticisms. You've been critical not only of the president's response here to what Russia is currently doing to Ukraine, but also last night, all of us, the three of us here, watching for the whole time in its entirety, the president's first State of the Union address and addressing some of those issues, but also getting to some of those domestic issues. Elise, let's start there. What were your thoughts of last night's speech?
I thought last night's speech was a weak State of the Union, both in delivery and certainly in policies. You know, the American people understand that our country is facing crises, whether it's the inflation crisis, whether supply chain crisis, or whether it's the war on Ukraine, national security crisis in this country because of failed unified Democrat government in Washington. And, you know, I've heard State of the Unions delivered by President Obama. I've heard them from President Trump and now President Biden. This is one of the weakest, probably the weakest ones that I've heard. And I was disappointed that rather than understanding that we need to unleash American energy independence, that we need to stop the $1 trillion of spending to curb inflation, we're getting more of the same far-left policy priorities from the President of the United States. Now, there were a few issues that we can work on that I agree that we should prioritize as a country. One is cancer research and the cancer moonshot. That's a huge bipartisan opportunity. Mental health, but I think it's important for Democrats to recognize that a lot of the mental health crisis that skyrocketed this past year, particularly among our kids, was because of their shutdown policies and the masking mandates that just made it so difficult for students in New York and across the country. And then, of course, veterans issues is always an opportunity for bipartisanship. So while the most part was very partisan and I disagreed with, I think it's important for listeners to know there are some issues where let's see what we can get done together.
At least one of the things that I was troubled by was when he talked about inflation, and he said we don't want to lower the cost of wages, but we want to bring down the cost of manufacturing or the cost. And yet costs are really three components: fuel, labor, and taxes, and he didn't do anything about bringing down any of those costs. So I don't know how he expects costs to come down without addressing those issues. I just wonder what your reaction was to that proposal.
You've got it spot on. We have a labor shortage in this country. Any small business or manufacturer, and I talk to them every day, every week, will tell you that it is incredibly difficult to find individuals to fill those open jobs right now, which is why we need workforce development, and we need to get the incentive for folks getting back to work. Democrats for far too long extended that pandemic unemployment assistance, which paid people more to stay out of work rather than the incentive getting back to work. You're right about the taxes. They've proposed tax increases for businesses. That's what he talked about last night. A minimum tax, and that would make us less competitive around the world, and that would really gut job creation when it comes to our growing manufacturers and our growing U.S. businesses. And then, of course, the cost of fuel. The president talked last night about American-made, but what he didn't talk about was American-made energy and how that will immediately unleash economic growth, lower the cost of not just gas at the pump, but home heating oil, which has skyrocketed this winter. It's very, very challenging for families in my district to balance their budget. So you're spot on. Those are three components of the economic crisis that people feel in the form of inflation that were not only not addressed, they're taking them in the wrong direction.
So, and Rocco, I know this might be a question that you were leading into as you were anticipating there, but building back a better America is something that we talked about. Do you think that is very similar to what President Trump was trying to do? And Rocco was pointing out, really, it seems like many of the failed attempts that this current president has already tried to get passed, but just kind of breaking them down or breaking them apart. Do you see that this is a really viable approach to try to get some of these things passed or passed through?
the American people need to know that the Build Back Better agenda will be the largest tax increase and the largest spending bill in our nation's history at a time when we're facing historic inflation in my lifetime. So the highest point in 40 years. I'm 37 years old, so people my age have not experienced this level of inflation before. The last thing you do is spend $4 trillion more dollars, the largest spending bill in our nation's history that's riddled not only with government overreach and new government entitlement programs, but it has tax increases. It would have a tax on home heating oil. That would devastate families, and it would make the inflation far, far worse. I do think, though, the White House obviously recognizes that inflation indeed is not transitory, like they said. They instead of belittling the American people, which they did for so long on inflation, he tried to make it seem like he had solutions. But I'm very fearful that the continuation of his economic policies will continue to fuel inflation, which is why it's so important for Republicans to win back the House to stop the reckless spending.
Now, Mark, you mentioned, just to go back to the oil fuel issue, you mentioned, and there's a number of people, especially Republicans, that are calling for the United States to become more energy independent, like we were under Trump, and things changed under Biden. But realistically, in your opinion, could Biden actually take steps to make the United States energy independent with Democratic support? I know the Republicans would support it, but he's got to worry a lot about what happens on the D side of the aisle. Does he really would he have realistically support from his own party to make the United States more energy independent?
Well, we know the far-left Democrat Party controls Joe Biden and controls Nancy Pelosi. I mean, they are the new far-left Democrat Socialist Party, and they will do anything they can to avoid American energy independence. Not only avoid, but to crush American energy independence. Look at the day one decision of Joe Biden to cancel the Keystone XL pipeline. They haven't issued a new permit for LNG projects. They have refused to allow new oil and gas projects. They have significantly made the regulatory environment that much harder. So whereas under President Trump you had, historic investment in American energy, which, by the way, is cleaner than energy produced around the world because we have the best innovators and the most advanced energy companies in the world. And then I think about a state like New York. We have a moratorium, as you know, on natural gas fracking, and yet you go across the state line to Pennsylvania and there are communities and towns that have boomed because of those energy jobs. So, I believe that is an important priority and must be addressed, especially given the increasing role of Russian energy in the global marketplace. We have to do what we can to crush that for national security, but for economic security purposes. I fear that today's Democratic Party is so far to the left, they will do anything they can to stop that, which is why Joe Biden didn't talk about it.
Even the more moderate Democrats. I know there's a lot that's led, and a lot of the volume comes from the more progressive wing of the party. But are you aware of moderate Democrats who might not be as loud but are willing to support some of those efforts?
It's been a long time since I've seen a moderate Democrat in Washington, D.C., I will tell you. And, people will give lip service to being moderate Democrats, but look at their voting records. They vote 99% of the time with Nancy Pelosi and Joe Biden. And if you're really a moderate Democrat, you should be speaking out in support of American energy independence. I have yet to hear that from a single Democrat elected to Congress, a single one of my colleagues. And it's because they're fearful of the left, and it's because they don't believe in American energy independence. So the moderate Democrat wing is gone. I haven't seen them, as I said, in years.